let's move to step 4, setting up a waste collection system. So after you created all the important infrastructure for your waste management system in step 3, you are now good to go to set up a waste collection system with your committee. Under the step, you have 3 main activities. The first one is about action planning. There is where you will work with your committee on to define which is the right waste collection system for the village. The second one is all about bin infrastructure. So we will show a little bit kind of which kind of bins are available and which could be useful in your waste collection system. The third activity is then kickstarting your collection system. So we will have a look into the very first day when your collection is actually happening. So now we will look at activity number 1, action planning. 2 objectives you should keep in mind during this activity. The first one is that your committee very well understands the different collection systems and then take an informed decision on which one is the best for the village and which should then be implemented. The second one is after you then define the collection system, you are all good to go into action planning. So here you need to be very clear that they understand which actions they should take, who will take this, and with what means or funds. The activities you should follow on are first, that you discuss with the committee clearly the different options for the collection system. After you think they have a very good understanding, you will move into a decision-making process where then the committee decides which is the most suitable collection system actually for the village. When you are clear with that, you will move into action planning. So you draw a plan where you clearly find, okay, this is the actions we need to take, who will do it, and how it will happen, and when it will happen. After you are clear with your activities, you then start with talking about funds. So how will you actually fund the different activities you want to have? The activity will take you roughly 2 hours, sometimes a bit longer when you cannot really find the correct collection system for the village. You will also conduct this activity in a meeting room. You should mainly include the waste committee as a stakeholder. In some occasions, it could be useful to have also the village leader present during this process. You will need some IEC material to explain the committee the different collection systems. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper into waste management. So as you remember from the lectures before, we divided 3 different kinds of management systems of waste. So the first one that was the multiple self-dropping site where everyone is bringing their waste to the dump site, but there are many of them. Then there is a single self-dropping site where there is only one dump site. And then there is a single community managed site where there is a collection system who is collecting the waste and bringing everything to the dump site. For the first system, which is self-dropping, you will not need any improved management system for your community, since most of the community will bring the waste to the dump site themselves. Here, in this kind of system, it works, as we said before, only in rather small communities, and it is preferred for those which have a rather low social integration. However, the challenge remains that littering will probably continue in these kind of self-managed systems for a certain degree. Under the community-managed site, we will look at 3 different modes of operation. The first one we are looking at is what we call voluntary. So here, The committee is organized into a voluntary group, and they will collect waste weekly, periodically, and nothing more. So this is a good system when you have a highly motivated community. It is mostly a smaller community, because when there is too much waste, this probably does not work as well. And you also have a community with very high social integration. The challenge in this kind of system is that very often, after a few months, maybe years, it becomes more difficult for the group to sustain itself, since they will never generate any money, and therefore at some point the group members will stop supporting the system. The second system we want to look at is what we call a donation-based system. So here the committee again is organized as a voluntary group, and they collect waste periodically. While they are collecting, they will receive donations from the community to support their activities. So this kind of system is good in rather larger communities with strong CSO support and a mentality of thinking by the community to support such operations, but also in communities which have maybe not such a strong administrative leadership. The social integration can range between high and medium. For this donation system, but also for the voluntary system, so both have one really huge advantage. Since people are not forced to pay for the waste collection, the community sees waste collection rather as something they will get presented, supported with, rather than actually like a service they will pay for. So in that way, it is much easier under these systems to get the community to participate in the waste collection system. So when you want the community to do waste segregation or bring their waste directly from their house to the vehicle, any other activity you request from the community is much easier to do when you run a voluntary or a donation-based system. For sure, under the donation-based system, you also have the challenge that your income is not regular, and at some point it might be not enough to support your operation. The last model we have a look at is a fee-based model. So this works in two different modes. Either it is a pay-as-you-drop model, where people pay directly to the waste collector when dropping off their waste, or it is a periodically paid model where the community has to pay monthly to the committee. So in this kind of system, the committee becomes actually a social business who is gathering money for their waste collection work. This system is more preferred really in large communities with different levels of social integration, but it is comparably a stable model which is also more closely linked with urban style models. However, there are two different challenges I want to look into. So the first one is actually in the pay-as-you-drop model. It is the waste collector who actually need to receive the money from the community. But often the waste collector is an employed person from the community who comes more from the lower end on the social ladder. So it is for that person sometimes quite difficult to force the household to pay for waste collection. The other challenge we always face is in a periodic system, so where the community has to pay monthly. Also, it cannot be the waste collector who is collecting the money, so you need to have someone else who is going around and knocking the door of each household to receive the fee, plus then all their excuses why they maybe cannot pay or whatever problems is actually then happening in the household. The only way out, which we found, is that you need to provide a commission to the fee collector. Otherwise, the system is falling apart because no one is voluntarily going around the community and doing this kind of work without being incentivized. Here we use mostly around 10%. 10% of the fees which are collected by the fee collector is the commission for that person. Finding the right model for the village you're working in is sadly not that easy. And even if you are explaining the different models in detail, it might not be that the committee at that point has actually the knowledge ready on which might be the most effective model for the village. After you explain the methods to them, they should try to kind of argue all the three models through and then come up with a consensus decision on which kind of model they prefer. At that point, it also makes a lot of sense to involve the village leader to get his or her opinion as well, to see that everyone who is now involved on decision making on solid waste in the village will finally be part of the decision making process regarding the right model. What you should discuss at that point as well is the involvement of the stakeholders, so meaning mostly household shops and other institutions in the village. So how should they interact with the waste collection system? Should they, for example, bring their waste directly to the truck? That saves a lot of workforce for the waste committee. Is there a fee or is there no fee? And how it is then collected? Is there a necessity for waste bins, and if yes, where should they be placed? Will the committee require the household to segregate their waste? So all these questions should be discussed at this point already. Having a collection system always will require a vehicle from you. Here are some points to keep in mind. First of all is, let's say, your general dimension of the vehicle. So if you decide to collect only inorganic waste, you should consider roughly 20 liters per household per week. However, when you are collecting mixed waste, it is more around 100 liter to 150 liter per household per week. From our side, how we prioritize the process is about going from the least motorized option to the, let's say, most high investment option. So we promote always actually a push cart and kind of animal cart or a bicycle cart as the most sustainable option, just because there is no additional fuel consumption and therefore it is easier to operate and cheaper to operate. When the village is too big or there is a very hard push to use something motorized, what also can work is a hanger you can add to a motorcycle. So in that way you only need to invest in a hanger and you can use any motorcycle which is already operational in the village. Or you also can use existing agricultural vehicles which might work as well. Only when then this is not working, you should consider larger vehicles like three-wheelers or even smaller trucks. The challenge that we are normally facing is that the community has a rather different opinions about vehicles. So from their side, they always tend to go to the larger vehicle they can have access to, and with the idea to reduce the number of collection rounds. So let's say the labor they have to put on. This is even more problem when you work for an NGO and where the community knows that you might have funds to support them with a vehicle. Another challenge you should think about is the steepness of the roads. When the village is located in mountainous areas, it is sadly nearly impossible to use a hand push cart. It just doesn't work. Or a bicycle cart also is nearly impossible. So there you will probably tend to use a motorized vehicle. In general, what we think is important to remember is that when there is a decision on the vehicle, just keep in mind that hand-pushed vehicles are always more benefiting the community, as you will actually pay for labor than vehicles which are motorized, because there the money is used for the investment on one side, and on the other side you need to pay for fuel as well, which is not really benefiting the community. All the decisions which have been made by the committee, you can fill into a kind of action plan, which is presented here through this two-dimensional matrix. So on the horizontal line, you have, on one side, you have the items you're talking about, then the action, who is responsible for it, the timeline if needed, and the funds if needed. And then you have the different items. First, do we have a collection system? What kind of vehicles? Do we have bins? And what kind of bins do we have? What kind of fee collection? If we have fee collection, then we talk about, do we have a treasury who holds funds? Do we have something like public relations? And do we build subgroups, working groups on plastic reduction, dump management, or organic waste? Here we have just filled this in for Nyaochang, and I will go a little bit through this. Under the item collection system, the group decided to run a community collection system. They will have a driver and 2 followers, and they will collect 1 time per week, every Saturday morning. And they will, as the committee will not charge any money for their work. As a vehicle, they will rent a 3-wheeler. The responsible person also is one of the committee members who owns this 3-wheeler. The committee will pay 10,000 Chat, which is roughly $5 per day of rent. Then regarding to bins, they will mostly rely on private bins, so meaning the households only have bins, and they will have a few public bins in some central places. Also, again, responsible is the committee, and they will build them in a few days. Fee collection, they will run a donation-based system, and the donation will be taken while collecting the waste. Then, do they have a treasury? Yes, one of the committee members will then hold the funds. In regards to public relations, they will set up a Facebook group, which is also organized by one of the committee members. Then regarding sub-working groups on plastic reduction or dump management or organic waste, they have not decided anything specifically yet. Then let me shortly talk about funding. So when you set up a waste collection system in a village, you will need some money to start the activities. So I will go a little bit through the prices, as at least from here in Myanmar, as we know how much it will cost. So in your country, this might be for sure a little bit different. From our side here, normally we will not pay for any dump site for the land. That has to be given by the community. An incinerator, as said before already, will cost something between $100 to $200. A pushcart, as you see here in the back, which we used actually in a fishing village, cost around $200 to $300. A hanger for a motorcycle around $500. A 3-wheeler or an agriculture wheeler, something about $1,500 to $2,000, and a truck then mostly beyond $10,000. Normally, we also provide the committee with a kind of kickstarting funding so that they can start the operation when they hire a vehicle, so they have some money to move. Also, we have small funding for uniforms and smaller other things they will need during the beginning of their operation. From our experience, supporting the group in the beginning with some kind of funds is quite important. Otherwise, when they are starting, even if they go into a paid collection system, they still need to operate for at least a month until they will have any money. In the beginning, it is quite challenging for the group to start operating when they do not have some initial fundings. There are some common challenges for this activity. The first one is that your committee might look at a much more advanced system they want to implement than their capacity currently actually allows. The second problem is more around legitimacy. So just remember that your committee is newly set up and they might not have the decision-making power to decide for all the activities you need for setting up the system. The third one is on funding. So unless you as an organization can kickstart the work, it is quite difficult for the committee to source all the resources from the village. When it is funding, it is very complicated, but also with voluntary labor, it's not easy to start the activities. Some recommendations on this. So first, you should try to push for a more simple system. A well-running basic structure is better than you start with a very complicated system and it ends failed. So the other one is, when you remember that your group is actually newly formed, try to encourage leadership in the group. So even if they finally cannot take the decision, try to push them as far as you can. So on this, when there are some barriers and you cannot take the final decision, try to have a follow-up meeting with the village lead and then take the final decisions in there.